habits are not a finish line. They're not something that it's not a race that you run and you cross it and then it's done. It's like, oh, we did it. It's a habit now. I don't have to think about it ever again.
Faster than a speeding bullet.
I ran until my muscles burned and my veins pumped battery acid.
More powerful than a locomotive.
An idea is like a virus. Resilient. Highly contagious.
Able to leap tall buildings in a single bound.
Today's episode is brought to you by betterhumanology.com, the free membership website brought to you by Into3 Fitness. Head over to betterhumanology.com and claim your free membership and get instant access to training programs, audio lessons, mental toughness training, ebooks, and more. Hey guys, Jared Moon here, and thank you for joining me in another episode of the Better Humanology podcast. Today we are talking habits with James Clear. A little bit more about James. James writes at his website, jamesclear.com, and that is the place, the home of his writing, where he shares science-based ideas on how to build habits that stick and strategies for improving your mental and physical performance. He has one of the fastest growing single author blogs in the world, and he is one very knowledgeable dude on the topic of building habits. Definitely some useful information in becoming a better human. I am excited to talk to him about this because building good habits is one of the most important things you can do to improve yourself, and James literally has this down to a science. So let's talk to him about habits, habit formation, some things that you can do, tips and tricks, and let's build some good habits. Let's talk to James. All right, James, how about you go ahead and get started and tell us your background and what you're doing now.
Sure. Well, first, thanks so much for having me, Jared. It's great to be on the show. As far as background goes, I've been an entrepreneur for 4 years now. Previously, I was an athlete for most of my life. I played baseball through college and then competed in Olympic weightlifting after that, which I still train 3 days a week at this point. And then I went to business school, and while I was in business school, I worked in the Center for Entrepreneurship. And I've always been interested in health and wellness. I had my undergraduate degree was in biomechanics, which was mostly chemistry and physics for me. And then I worked at a medical practice while I was in business school in between my first and second year. So I had sort of all these different touch points with health and wellness between school and science and work and also being an athlete. But when I was in the Center for Entrepreneurship, I saw all these guys starting their own businesses and sort of, rolling things out and trying stuff on their own. And that was where I kind of got the itch to start my own thing. So that was 4 or 5 years ago. And I spent the first 2 years sort of fumbling around and trying a bunch of ideas and, learning skills that I didn't have at the time and making a bunch of mistakes. And then eventually started to get things moving in the right direction and, build a couple profitable businesses and learned how to build an audience really was the main thing for me, how to generate leads and marketing and all that stuff. And that led me down this path of user psychology or consumer psychology. So in order to build a successful business or to get anybody to, buy something or to understand what people wanted, I had to understand the psychology behind a customer. And as I started reading more about that, I naturally started applying all of that to my background in health and wellness. So I would read a study about psychology and think about how I could apply that to my business. But then I was also thinking, oh, this would work for my weightlifting habits in the gym or nutritional habits in the kitchen or, just any type of regular habit, personal lifestyle habits I was trying to build. Maybe this psychology stuff would be useful for that as well. And as I started getting deeper and deeper into that, I got obsessed with it and just started reading more. And that led me to this point where I was writing about this in private for about a year, where I was just sort of, collecting my thoughts and thinking through things and, reading a little bit more about the science and strategy behind changing your behavior. And November 12th, 2012 was the first day that I decided to publish an article on jamesclear.com about habits and behavior change and improvement. And I've been publishing there every Monday and Thursday since then. So that's sort of the background of how we got to this point. And then over the last 2 years, as I've written more about behavior change and habit formation, the site has done pretty well. I get about 400,000 visitors a month at this point, and the email list is over 100,000 people. And so I've had, at least this past year, I've had over 5 million people read my work. So it's been good. It's been a lot of fun. And I think that people seem to find it useful. And for me, it's great to be able to share something that I'm personally interested in. You know, I want to build better habits and improve myself. I often try to say that, like, I'm not an expert by any means. I'm just someone working through this with everybody else. But it's cool to not only work on something that you find useful and that helps make you a better person, but to also be able to share that with a lot of people and hopefully make a small difference in their lives as well.
I've read a lot of your articles and stuff on your website, and I was automatically drawn to it. When I reached out to you, it's been a while now since I initially reached out to you and just, saw your website and had read some of your articles, and they all are really well researched, in depth, and very applicable. And that's why I definitely wanted to have you on the show, especially talking about habits, because we all know how important that is when talking about things you said, like in the kitchen or in the gym with weightlifting. And so I'll go ahead and hop right into talking about habit formation, because I know that is a central thread to your writing, and you write about the science of behavior change. Can you kind of elaborate on the importance of building habits?
Sure. Well, there's a short story that I like to tell that I think summarizes it pretty well. About 10 years ago, in the early 2000s, mid-2000s, Great Britain's professional cycling team they'd never won a Tour de France. They wanted to sort of get to that elite level of professional cycling, but they hadn't been there yet. And so they hired this guy named Dave Brailsford. And when they brought him in, they said, all right, Dave, what's your plan for getting us to the next level? And he had this strategy that he called the aggregation of marginal gains. And the way that he described it is that it's sort of the 1% improvement in everything related to what you're doing with your particular goal. So in this case, it was cycling. So he thought, okay, if we can improve each facet of cycling by about 1%, then we can make significant improvement overall. And so they did a bunch of things you would expect. They looked for slightly lighter bike tires, for example. They had their outdoor racers wear indoor racing suits because the indoor suits are a little bit lighter and more aerodynamic. They had their riders wear biofeedback sensors so they could see how they were responding to training individually, and then adjust the training and the programming accordingly. So there were all these things that you would expect. But then they also did a bunch of stuff that you wouldn't think a cycling team would do. So, for example, they figured out the type of pillow that led to the best night's sleep, and then they used that pillow on the road at hotels with their riders. They figured out the type of massage gel that promoted recovery the best, and they would use that. They taught their riders how to wash their hands to reduce the risk of infection and illness and getting sick so they could keep the team healthy. And so Brailsford thought, all right, if we can do this, if we can execute on this strategy of making 1% improvements in every little area, I think we can win a Tour de France in about 5 years. He ended up being wrong. They won the Tour de France in 3 years, and then they repeated again in the fourth year with a different rider. And then when the British cycling team went to the Olympics in London in 2012, they won 70% of the gold medals available. And so this idea that 1% gains make a difference, that I think is the essence of why habits are important. On any given day, about 40% of your behaviors are automatic. They're habits, according to a study from Duke University. And so if 40% of the things that you do on any given day are just automatic and routine, that adds up to a significant number of the amount of actions you take over the span of a year. And if we know from this story of Brailsford and marginal gains that 1% improvements can add up to something very significant, then it becomes clear that habits are a really important way to capture that. If you can make a slightly better choice automatically each day, if you can build a slightly better habit, a slightly more useful action, then that's going to add up to something significant. And it's true on the flip side as well. If you make a slightly worse choice each day, if you do something that's a little questionable, if you just make an exception for just this once type behavior, and you repeat that over and over again through a bad habit, then that can actually derail you. And in fact, most of the time when people find themselves in a situation like, how did I get here? Like, how did I gain this much weight? Or how am I this unproductive? Or whatever the issue happens to be. It's very rarely a question of one bad decision that just, all of a sudden turned things bad. It's the collection of many tiny choices that we make day after day that add up to something significant. And that something significant can either be positive or it can be negative. And that's why habit formation and behavior change is so essential and important to improvement in our lives, not only from a health perspective, but from productivity, relationships, and nearly every other area of life.
I wanted to hit on that because I think I read an article on your website that said, build habits rather than goals. Do I have that right in saying the...
Yeah, so the phrase that I like to use is systems over goals, but it's the same type of idea.
Yeah.
Systems, processes, habits, like focus on repeating the behavior itself rather than getting wrapped up in the result.
Okay. And I was recently reading a book, as the One Thing by Gary Keller, and he mentioned the myth of the whole 21 days to building a lasting habit. And I was reading that book, and I was like, oh, I've actually read this on James Clear before. This is really cool. So I definitely want to talk more about that because everywhere, you could find it on the internet everywhere. You could talk to someone, and they'll probably assume or tell you that it's 21 days to build a habit or break a bad one or whatever the case may be. Can you talk a little bit about, that myth or, what the real case may be when building habits?
Yeah, sure. So there's an article on my site, which you mentioned, where I talk about where the myth came from and sort of the backstory and all that stuff. But the punchline to it is that a lot of times in society, people say things like, oh, it takes 21 days to build a new habit or 30 days to build a new habit, some magical number. And the researchers said, all right, let's go ahead and look at this. And so a study at University College London looked at a wide range of habits, little things like drinking an extra glass of water at lunch, all the way to big things or more difficult things like going for a run after work 5 days a week, something like that. And what they found is probably the answer you would expect if you sit and think about it for a minute, which is it depends, right? There's no magic number, and it depends based on how difficult the habit is. It also depends based on the circumstances and the environment that you live in. So I talk a lot about environment design, and I think it's a really powerful way to change behavior. If you live in an environment that promotes good behaviors or that surrounds you with positive people or choices that are better and healthier, it's a lot easier to make a healthy choice and build a healthy habit. Conversely, if you're surrounded with an environment that makes those behaviors difficult, well, then it's going to take a lot longer to make it a habit because you're constantly fighting against the forces that surround you. So anyway, the end of this is that the range is anywhere from at least what the researchers found, anywhere from 18 days all the way up to about 250 days. So it could be, a month, it could be 8 months, but the average time that it takes to build a new habit is 66 days. And I don't think even that number is probably not good to latch onto and be like, oh, I should just make sure I can do this for the first 66 days. The moral of the story is it's going to take you months. It's going to take some time to build a new habit. And instead, rather than focusing on, can I do this for 30 straight days? Habits are not a finish line. They're not something it's not a race that you run and you cross it and then it's done. It's like, oh, we did it. It's a habit now. I don't have to think about it ever again. Instead, treat it as a process. You're not trying to get anywhere. You're just trying to do something good today. And if you do something good today, enough days in a row, then it'll become a habit and you'll be making progress in your life. But you're never going to get to a point where you're like, oh, I did it for 30 days and now it's done.
So I have two kind of questions. One question and then another thing I would like to talk about involving habits is, do you have a recommendation for when people want to build new habits on picking up too many habits? The new year, everyone wants to do crazy stuff. And do you feel like if someone came out and they're like, you know what, I'm going to develop 15 new habits and they're all, kind of difficult to do. Do you think that that's a bad strategy for building habits?
Yes, I do. So and there are differing schools of thought on this, but the general consensus is that it should be a low number. So I prefer to try to build one new habit at a time, like have one thing be my focus. There are other people like BJ Fogg at Stanford University. He'll often tell you to start 3 habits at once, but what he talks about are very tiny habits. That's actually the name of his course, is Tiny Habits. And so we're talking about really small things here, like do 3 push-ups a day, something that's really, really unthreatening, in the fact that it's so small. And this is a good segue into just talking about habit formation a little bit. Leo Babauta has this phrase that new habits should be so easy that you can't say no to them. And I think that's a great metric, a great threshold. Doing 3 push-ups doesn't sound impressive at all, but it's something that you can't ignore, right? It's like, oh, I don't have any excuse for not doing it. And what we often fail to realize is that in the beginning, especially, it's more important to do the behavior consistently than it is to do something that you think will be impressive or big or grand or make a difference. Because if you don't do the behavior consistently, then you'll never get to a point where it's going to make a difference. Even if you do 500 push-ups in one day, if you only do it one day, it's not going to matter over the long run.
Right.
So that idea of let me start with one push-up or let me start with 3 push-ups and then I'll improve by a little bit each day. I'll make those 1% gains that we were talking about. That's a really good way to think about building a new habit. So when I was building my push-up habit, I wanted to get to 50 per day. But rather than start there, I started with 10 because I knew I could do 10 in 15 seconds and not have any excuse for not doing it. So I did 10 the first day, and then I took the 1% gain strategy, and I went up to 11 the second day, and then 12, and then 13, and so on, until eventually I was just doing 2 sets of 25, and it was easy, and I didn't have to like force myself to really get motivated to do it because it was just sort of built into my routine. So that's an example of how to build a new habit, but it's also an answer to your question of should you focus on one thing or 15 things or whatever. You should probably focus on one. And the only other thing I'll add to that is that there are certain behaviors in our life that we could call keystone habits. And a keystone habit is the 1 or 2 things that you do that sort of naturally pull the rest of your life in line. So for me, it's weightlifting, it's training. And so if I know that if I go to the gym every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, a couple things are going to happen. Not only will I get stronger, which is, why I'm doing the habit there, but I'll feel good about myself because I went and got my workout in. But I will also sleep better because I'll be tired when I get to bed that night, and so I'm going to get better sleep, which means I'll be more well rested the next day, so I can put better energy into my work. I know that I'm going to be really focused because there's that kind of magical period for an hour or 2 after your workout where you just have like mental clarity. So I improve my focus. And then I also tend to eat better naturally. It's, maybe I could eat worse if I wanted to, but when I work out, I kind of feel like, oh, okay, I got this good momentum going. I don't want to, let's not waste this, let's keep it going. And so at no point am I trying to build better nutrition habits or better sleep habits or more focus, but those are just sort of side effects of doing this one habit of working out. And so I would say if you have a lot of areas that you'd like to change in your life, think about what that keystone habit might be for you. And focus on that one first. And this could be many different things for different people. Some, like CEOs, swear by a daily meditation habit. They sort of pulls the rest of their life in line. You'll hear about people who work on their personal finances and finally get like a budget handled or just start paying their debt off. And that one habit leads to changes in other areas of their life. So for me, it was lifting. For you, it could be something else. But keystone habits are a great way to go if you'd like to make a lot of changes, but you're going to get overwhelmed by trying to focus on 10 things. Just focus on that one keystone habit.
The keystone habit kind of directing everything else you do. That's really good. Thanks for sharing that. And sure. Let's talk about actually forming the habit now, because I've read through your book on your website, and you mentioned the 3 R's of habit formation: the reminder, routine, and reward. Can you kind of go over that and how it works?
Sure. So this basic cycle or sequence, some people call it the habit loop. It's been covered in a bunch of different places. I first learned about it from B.J. Fogg, the professor I mentioned previously at Stanford. It's also mentioned in a book called The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, if you'd like to get another summary of it somewhere. But the basic idea is that each habit that you form follows a sequence. And that sequence goes like this. I call it the 3 R's. You'll hear other people use different terms, but same process. So the first is a reminder. And this is like a cue or a trigger. It's something that prompts the behavior. So, for example, let's say you have the habit of answering your phone whenever it rings, right? This is a habit that most people have. So when the phone rings, that's the reminder. That's the trigger. That's the cue. It's the thing that prompts the behavior. When you answer the phone, that's the routine. That's the habit itself. So this is the second piece. So reminder first, then routine. And then the third piece is the reward, which is the benefit that you get for doing the behavior. And the important thing to remember is that all habits, good habits, bad habits, things you want to do, things you don't want to do, they all have some type of reward associated with them, some type of benefit, some type of consequence, something that drives you to repeat the behavior over and over again. So, for example, with the phone, when you answer it, you get to satisfy your curiosity for why someone is calling, right? Maybe that's the benefit. It's like psychological. If you have something like eating a cookie, for example, so say you walk into the kitchen, you see the cookie on the counter. So that's the trigger, that's the reminder, that's the cue, that the visual seeing the cookie there. So that prompts you to pick it up and eat it, which is the routine. And then the reward is how it tastes, how it makes your body feel, the sugar and the fat, like, coming into your body and processing that. All of those things associated with the sensation and process of eating the cookie. That's the benefit. And so although you may not want to eat the cookie because you might gain weight, you will continue to do it because of all the positive benefits associated with the habit. And so that tells your brain, next time you see a cookie on the counter, hey, remember this? This gave us a positive reward last time. We enjoyed that. So let's repeat it and do the same thing again. And if you go through that cycle enough times, you just keep going around and around the circle, and it becomes a habit. It becomes ingrained in your behavior. So that's the basic process for how habits are formed, and sort of how science and researchers are looking at the issue right now.
And I know we hit on it a minute ago when you're talking about weightlifting being your keystone habit that leads to other aspects of your life, and you also mentioned your push-up habits. But I know you're a former college baseball player, and like you said, you're now a weightlifter. Do you have any other ways that you apply those principles to health and fitness?
Yeah, so the one that probably is most useful, or that people can use regardless of what type of training they do, is something that I learned from my time as a baseball player, but I didn't realize what I was doing until I started studying habits. So here's what happened. With baseball, you play a lot of games. So in college, we're playing, 40 games over the span of 2 months or so. And so coaches are always saying things like, you got to find a way to be up to play today. You got to find a way to be motivated. You got to find a way to be ready to go. And naturally, if you're playing that many games, you're playing 6 games a week or whatever, there are going to be some days where you show up and you just don't feel like playing. You're not motivated. You're not, primed and ready to go. So what I did was I figured out this way, or I developed this pregame routine that I would go through no matter what I felt like when I showed up at the ballpark. So I would do a certain series of stretches out by the foul pole, then I'd run across the outfield, do some more stretches, jog back. I'd do a series of throws from like the same distances, and then move back, and just the same sequence. It took about 15 or 20 minutes to get through this whole thing. And what happened was it became a habit and a routine, or this sort of ritual that I did in the beginning, and it acted like a switch in my brain where it said, hey, remember the last time we did this? It's time to play now. And so I was able to trigger like the game mode in my brain by doing this ritual the same way each time. And if you pay attention, you'll see athletes and performers in all different areas doing this type of thing. Like if you watch basketball players, they'll often do the same type of sequence before they shoot a free throw. They all have their own little pattern of 3 dribbles, spin the ball, touch your side, and then shoot, or something like that, right? They all have their little ritual. And comedians, you often hear about them reciting the same type of story to themselves before they go onto stage or something like that. There's any type of performer, they all kind of develop their own little ritual. The reason why rituals are important is because they act like an on-ramp for your behavior. So what I mean is that oftentimes, like say you get home from work and you don't feel like you have the motivation or the willpower to go work out. You just don't feel up for it, the same way that a baseball player might not feel up for the game that day. If you have a ritual that you go through each time before you work out, so say you get home, you want to go for a run, you don't feel like it, but your typical ritual is you pull the water bottle out of the pantry, you go ahead and fill that up with some water and ice, you put it on the counter, you grab your keys, you put it next to the water bottle, you get your bag out of the closet and set it by the front door, and then you put your shoes on and you tie your shoes. If you do that ritual in the same way, the same pattern every time, then even if you don't feel motivated to work out, you can get your ritual started because you almost start doing it just automatically. You're not even really relying on willpower or motivation to do it at this point once you've done it enough times. And at this point, you're not even worried about working out. You don't have to focus on working out. You don't even have to run a step. All you have to do is put your energy into starting the ritual. That's the only thing that you think about is, how can I start that ritual? How can I get the water bottle out of the pantry, right? Let me do the first step. And what often happens is that as you're doing the ritual, it acts like that on-ramp for your behavior that I had with baseball. It acts like that switch in your brain where it says, all right, remember the last time you ran? You enjoyed that when you were done. You were glad you did it. You felt good about yourself, right? All these feelings start coming through the ritual. And so that would be the one thing that I would say to focus on when it comes to building habits, regardless of what the training is. What's your pregame routine? What's your ritual? What's the on-ramp for your behavior? How can you make that process as automatic as possible so that when you're not feeling like working out, when you don't feel like doing whatever it is you need to do that day, you can just put all your energy into starting the ritual and trust that motivation will come after starting, not before.
My next question kind of has something, you kind of mentioned that would be a recommendation, but so if it's the same, that's fine. But if someone wanted to make a change today, like through habit formation, what would you tell to them, or what would you recommend to them?
Yeah, so the strategy that I think is really useful, or maybe counterintuitive, depending on how you've approached goal setting and habits in the past, it's best to tell with a little story. So Southwest Airlines is a very popular airline today, and then they started in the 70s and 80s, and they had this period of growth where they were doing very well, all the way through the mid-90s. And during this period of time, a lot of airline companies were really struggling. They weren't doing well. Most of them were going bankrupt or losing money each year. Southwest was posting a profit year after year. So in 1996, Southwest was like the hot airline, and everybody wanted them to move to their city. All these airports were clamoring for Southwest to come. So I believe in 1996, they had over 100 different cities that said, Southwest, we would like you to extend service to our airport. And this is a great business problem to have, right? Like everybody wants to be able to grow quickly, have all sorts of options. And so you would think that they would say, all right, let's jump on this, right? Let's take advantage of this growth period. Similar to how if you were, lifting in the gym and all of a sudden you were able to throw up to 100 more pounds on the bar, you'd be like, yes, let me take full advantage of this, right? Well, what they ended up doing was something the complete opposite. They only expanded to 4 new cities in 1996. And this story, which I first heard from Jim Collins, I think he may mention in his book, Great by Choice. The reason that Southwest, according to Collins at least, was able to sustain this growth year after year and continue to improve is that they set an upper limit for their growth. And this is the exact opposite of how we often think about improving. If you think about a lot of health goals, for example, we often set a lower limit, a lower bound for our behavior. I want to lose at least 20 pounds in the next 4 months, or I want to bench press at least 50 pounds more this year, or I want to run at least 3 miles when I get home from work today. It's all about the lower limit. And the implication is, if you can do more than that, then of course you should try to do more, right? To at least hit this number, but if you can get the more out of that, then go ahead and push yourself. But what Southwest is doing is saying, no, we have a huge opportunity ahead of us, but we're only going to grow to 4 cities. We're not going to do more than that. And this idea of setting an upper bound for your behavior is the opposite of what society tells us and this ambitious goal setting idea and, chasing everything that you can get. But it's great for building processes and systems and habits that stick. And so when it comes to building a process that will lead you to somewhere more significant in the future, I think it's more important to focus on the upper bound rather than the lower bound. I'll give you one example. A reader of mine named Mitch, he ended up losing over 100 pounds over the course of a year or two. Awesome. And when he added exercise into his routine, he told himself, all right, I have to go to the gym 5 days a week, but I'm not allowed to stay for more than 5 minutes. So he would show up, and when it got to 6 minutes, he would leave. And he did this for over 4 weeks, so those first 4 to 6 weeks that he was in the gym. And eventually it got to the point where he was like, I'm coming here all the time. I kind of feel like staying longer, which is the exact opposite of how most people feel when they're trying to add, some type of new fitness habit in, right? They're focused on, all right, I really got to push myself. I'm so out of shape. I need to stay here for 45 minutes and, really focus and grind so that I can, lose this weight or get in shape or whatever. But what Mitch was focused on, and this is the important sort of punchline to all this, he was focused on building the behavior first and letting the results come later. Most of us are focused on getting the results as fast as possible, and we forget to take the time to build the behavior. We aren't patient enough to say, all right, let me just do 5 minutes of work for the first few weeks, and even if I feel like that isn't going to make a difference at all, I'm going to become the type of person who doesn't miss workouts. And I know that if I'm the type of person who doesn't miss workouts, then eventually I can become the type of person who works out for 30 minutes or 40 minutes or an hour or however long. But it's only by focusing on building the behavior first and putting the results later that you can do that. If you try to get the results right away or go as fast as possible, then you never give yourself the opportunity to build the habit and the behavior that you need to make long-term progress.
That's an impressive story. Congrats to your reader Mitch there too for hitting it out of the park. That's an amazing way to look at things, and I think very few people would approach any goal or fitness, health and fitness routine that way. That's really cool.
Yeah, thank you. I like it too, and I've learned a lot from my readers, probably more than I've taught them. So it's great to have stories like that and people to sort of blaze the trail and show what these ideas look like in practice, which I think really helps the rest of us, myself included, put the ideas to use.
Yeah. All right, man. Are you ready for the quick fire questions of the show?
Yeah, let's get after it.
All right, man. The hardest workout you've ever done?
So individual workout, I would pick, we called it stations in college, but it was just, it's like Hell Week for a lot of teams or whatever, but it's just this brutal combination of body weight stuff, strength training, and sprinting in between every exercise. So there was a lot of running and a lot of puking. Thankfully, not from me, but from other guys on the team. And then hardest program, probably small lob squat routine. It's just really intense, and it's 13 weeks long, and you got to take care of yourself, and you just have to really sleep a lot and eat a lot, and it's kind of a job to do the workout without running yourself into the ground.
Yeah, I've had a lot of people ask me about that program. Having done it myself, I'm like, you need to. That's going to become your job, and if you don't do it right, it's not going to work. Because if you're not recovering well or sleeping well and eating well, all that stuff.
Yeah. I think you should. I think you should be able to squat 1.5 times your body weight for a set of 5 before you try small lob. If you can't do that yet, then you probably need to just do 5x5 or starting strength or whatever before you worry about doing intense stuff like that.
All right, man. In your opinion, what's the best activity for building mental toughness?
Some type of physical fitness. I mean, there's something about pushing yourself physically that reveals who you are mentally. I love learning. I was this big, science nerd and dork and everything in school. And I love reading and all that process, but being an athlete is what taught me how to be mentally tough. And I don't know what it is, but there's something about pushing your body toward its physical limit that reveals what you're made of and helps craft that as well. You can build it through that process too.
Awesome. If you could train with any significant figure in history, who would it be and why?
Oh man. There's so many great options. I guess I'll say Paul Anderson. He's like a strength figure that a lot of people might not know, but he could squat over 1,000 pounds raw.
Wow.
And I would love to be able to just I don't know. I think I'd probably learn more from watching him train than what he could tell me. He was on a different planet with regards to strength, so I don't know if he'd have many ideas that I could put to use. But I think that would be really fun. I would love to get lunch with all sorts of significant figures, but if I got to train, I might as well pick a strength guy.
Right. All right. And if you could only have one piece of equipment to train with for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Well, I guess I have to pick a barbell. If I only had a barbell and weights and I didn't have a squat rack or anything else, I could at least clean and jerk. And that would probably be more than enough that would be an interesting experiment, actually. If you just cleaned and jerked for, I don't know, say 3 months just to see where you're at, you'd probably be a lot stronger and more athletic than you would think.
Yeah, there's so many different ways you could program that too. Yeah, it would be very beneficial.
Yeah.
All right, man, most important question of the show, the best advice you have for becoming a better human.
Oh, man. Charlie Munger, the famous investor, he's Warren Buffett's partner. He's got a lot of great lines and stuff. But one of his lines is that one of the best things any human being can do is help someone else know more. And I think that's a great idea for becoming a better person. The one thing that separates the human race from nearly every other species on the planet is that we have the ability to collectively learn. And what I mean is that we can build upon the discoveries and ideas and lessons learned of our ancestors. The things that we're building today were prefaced by something that was done a decade ago or 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago. And we have continued to build upon that and expand as a civilization, as humans, as a race. And the only way that we've been able to do that is that the people before us took the time to teach the things that they discovered. And then we took those things and we took them just a step further. And then if we continue to teach, the people after us will do the same. And so I think when it comes to being a better person or living a meaningful life or contributing something to society and leaving your mark on the span of humanity, helping somebody else know more is probably about the best way that you can spend your time.
All right, so before we close it out, what's the best place for people to learn more about you and what you're doing?
Sure. So I mentioned earlier, I write every Monday and Thursday at jamesclear.com. We cover a lot of the topics that we talked about during this interview. So habit formation, behavior change, and just sort of science-based ideas for living a better life, generally speaking. If you'd like more information specifically about habits and ways to build them, I have a couple exercises in this PDF guide that I put together on, how to build new habits and sort of incorporate them into your life, as well as just some strategies that other researchers and scientists have talked about using for making progress and building habits that stick. This is all in a free guide called Transform Your Habits. I think it's about 45 pages. It's just a quick PDF download that you can use and sort of dive into right away. You can download that for free at jamesclear.com/habits. So that's probably a good place to start if you'd like more on what we've already covered.
Okay, and I highly recommend everyone go read that PDF. I know that I have. It has a lot of valuable information on top of James Clear's website, just a ton of great information. He publishes twice a week, and I read most every article and find a lot of value out of every single one of them. So I highly recommend checking out his website and learning more about what he's doing if you want to become a better human. James, I want to thank you for being on the show.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Jared. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, man. Hey guys, thanks for listening to the Better Humanology podcast. If you want to know about any of the resources we talked about, head on over to betterhumanology.com and check out the podcast show notes. Likewise, we have betterhumanology.com/toolbox, where you can find every resource that we've ever talked about on the podcast. So go check it out. Until next time, here's to becoming a better human.
Your best. Losers always whine about their best.